What is going on, everybody? A2 Angler here, and I thought I'd just make a quick video. I'm doing some cleaning up of my tackle boxes and the kayak and the trunk and the car, and just looking at a lot of the things that were just laying around. And I thought I'd make just a quick video about some of the baits that I've been using this year that really produced well for me. Maybe some of the baits that were new for me as well. So, first thing I want to show you is the jig. So the first jig that I just really like this jig. This is a Kayak jig. Really good jig. It's a very compact jig, but it's also made of tungsten. So you get heavier weight in a smaller profile. This jig for me has just been one that I've always kind of gravitated towards. I use it almost all the time. Have the jig tied on. This jig, for example, was the jig that I was using in the state championship. That got me 5 fish, but that also on day 2 was able to find me the fish I needed in order to secure a 5th place finish, along with a couple of the baits that are on this table. But the jig for me, really great Kayak little jig. Trailer is that's a max scent trailer there. These are kind of hard to find, so I don't use them as much. But once I found them, put them on the back of this, things just really started to go well. And the other jig that I've really enjoyed using is the Fighter jig. I think this is an Outcast. I may be wrong. Tackle jig. But this was designed by Fighter. This is just I think it's called the Cage Fighter or the Stealth Fighter, one of the two. The difference is in the line tie. But you can see this thing is just completely beat up. And another really good jig to go to when you need some of that. Kind of as a smaller jig. They kind of have a similar size profile. So I've really enjoyed using those jigs. When the jig's not kind of going off, I really moved away from the chatterbait. Lots of guys use the chatterbait. Palenz uses a chatterbait. And it just seemed like everybody was using a chatterbait. So I started thinking to myself, okay, if the fish are really getting conditioned, if that's really a thing, and they're seeing lots of chatterbaits, what is something that I could use to differentiate myself that would live in that similar category? They're not the same, but a similar category. Moving, bottom of the column, mid column, maybe even burning it on the close to the top of the surface. So last year, 2 years ago, at the state championship up in Sheboygan, Burt Mullet area, I think that's where it was, I just happened to go to one of the art fairs. And at that art fair, there was a guy, and he was selling spinnerbaits. And I'm going to be honest, I see, art fair people selling spinnerbaits and thought, like kind of cute, right? But then I really started to think about, like, this guy's making his own baits. He must, so we started talking. And I got to realize that, no, the people who make their own baits are really, really serious about it. And I can really appreciate that. So this caught my eye. This is called Mr. Sparkles. And the head is kind of interesting. The head looks like a guppy head almost. It's a hidden weight, so it's got a lot of weight on the shaft, but it also has a rattle on it. And I thought that was interesting. Something that he explained to me he really enjoyed were these beads on the wire. If you look at maybe something else, I've noticed, and this is not a knock on Megabass, this is just a Megabass that I picked up. They have this plastic shaft here that separates the blades, and it only takes a couple pikes on your line, a couple pike strikes, for that to get really like beat up and just broken, actually. And sometimes that plastic will strip off, and like, yeah, you could replace it with your own part, but these metal beads kind of solve that issue. They add a little bit of flash as well, maybe a little bit of sound as that blade is kicking around. So I gave this a shot, and I won a tournament off of this exact, no, not this exact bait, but this bait caught a couple of those fish. It was actually this bait that I found. This is a Daiwa Steez spinner bait from Japan, and it has the same, I don't know if you can see, the same bead arrangement on that. So now that I've really gotten into spinner baits this year and had some luck with them, when I look for a good spinner bait, I look for those beads. I don't know what it is for me. Those beads, they have something special. Maybe it's a different look because other companies are using either like a metal shaft or that plastic shaft to separate the blades, but this is a Colorado blade, for example. I think that's what it's called. I'm still learning all this stuff, but those beads on the spinnerbait really made a big difference in my spinnerbait usage this year. So something to think about. Next up for me would be the jerkbait. And again, this year I moved away from things that I felt really confident with, chatterbaits, and in this category would be like the swim bait, right? The swim bait to me does something similar, lives in the same area as a jerkbait, but when I started learning about jerkbaits, immediately was, to me, a percentage thing. So I feel like when I get bit on a swim bait, a single hook swim bait, that I will land that fish. I stopped using a lot of jerkbaits, mainly the megabass jerkbaits, because I was losing a lot of fish. And in the off season last year, I thought to myself, like, what is going on? There's no way that a $24, $25 jerkbait can be that bad. And I chalked it up to user error. And something that I learned about, especially the megabass jerkbaits, are they have these, I think they're called Katsuage hooks. They're very, very fine hooks. And I've seen a few videos where they talk about this jerkbait really being used on spinning tackle. It's not quite meant for bait casting. Of course, you can use it on a bait caster, and I think most people do. But in Japan, they were kind of envisioned to be used on the spinning rod. I don't know if that has any weight or if that's true, but if that's true, it would make sense why these are so thin and brittle. And, once I started really dialing back my drag on my jerkbait setup, these really took off for me, and I started doing really, really well on the megabass, and then started exploring and found the Stunna. That's made by Berkeley. So basically what I want to say about the jerkbait is I love it. This has almost completely replaced the swim bait, that 3-4 inch swim bait for me, for one major reason. One major reason that this is better than a swim bait for me is because of the amount of flash I can get in the water, the amount of pulling power this bait has. If a fish sees this, they're going to come check it out. If they bite it or not, that's a different story. But in my opinion, when I'm throwing a jerkbait, I'm getting followed by something. Perch, bluegill, bass, pike. All of these fish are so curious when they see these jerkbaits, click-clacking through the water. And based on the color and depth, with the bill, you can really dial in a very solid jerkbait presentation. Maybe not a bite, but a presentation. And the other great thing about the megabass jerkbaits is that they do a great job suspending in mainly colder water is what I've kind of learned and read. These are deadly in cold water. And then moving over to the Berkeley Stunna acts completely different. So this suspends in the water column. These are built and marketed to have a slow sink to them. And they have like a shimmy as they go down. This is the Berkeley Stunna. This one is the +1. because I wanted to get it a little bit deeper, and then also with the sinking, I can get it into a zone that I don't think most people. Wow, I just hooked myself. uh, get it into a zone where I don't think most people are using a jerk bait. This runs 2 to 4 feet. Sometimes you can get it down to 6 depending on your line size. But for both of these, if you can pull those fish in and then kill it, and if it's suspending, even if it's slowly shimmying down, you're giving that fish more time and you have a higher percent of possibility. When that fish is coming to check it out, it stops, it's looking, a couple more twitches of your rod, and that fish eats it. So for me, I think I still would keep the swim bait in my arsenal. But as far as a spinner bait goes, as far as a jerk bait goes, it's almost replaced it for me. There will be times when I'll throw that swim bait. Maybe the wind is just a little bit too much for the casting of this, or distance is important to me, or like especially for smallmouth, I can chuck swim bait out really far on spinning tackle. I could probably get a same distance on a jerk bait, but they're kind of just two different ideas. But for me, for the most part, if I'm looking for that feeding fish and I'm ripping bank or ripping deep, that jerk bait has been a lot of fun to learn this year. Moving over to top water, I've really liked using poppers in the past. I have tried using these types of pencil poppers. This is an Evergreen Shower Blow 105. I have a love-hate relationship with top water. For me, top water, when it's good, it's great, but I think the conditions to throw it kind of have to be right. And I really tried to break that this year by throwing this even when I didn't think it was quite right for it. And I had some fish, I had some good fish, I had some good eats, but nothing consistent for me, nothing to where I could say, like, this is my go-to moving bait on top water. I might give this another go in the coming season and really try to find where it works, maybe grass flats, or maybe some isolated cover, maybe between docks or around docks or at the point of docks. I'm sure it works. I'm sure some people love this type of top water or moving bait on top water. But for me, I don't know. The popper right now is still great, although I didn't use it this year almost at all. Another great moving bait that I've learned this year is the lipless. Now this thing has a lot of rattles in it. This thing is like chock full of BBs, and this thing is loud. Depending on the color that you get, like I was using a lot of blue chrome. The Pikes got a lot of them, but you can do a lot with these. You can burn them at the top. You can kind of slow roll it through the middle or the bottom of a water column. You can yo-yo it. You can hop it, rip it in grass. Really, really versatile bait, and one that I really had to spend a lot of time with. It's one of those where I just took it out, me and one rod, in order to learn it, and won a tournament in the fall off of this on a lake with a guy who's just like owns that lake. So it was pretty cool to have that work in that way, and practice it all year. Always had it with me, using it kind of similarly to the chatterbait. Never really popped off for me until the fall rolled around, and then the fall was just lights out on this thing, and I was using it every day. Another nice bait that is kind of like special technique, I guess you'd say, is the flipping bait. Now, there's pitching and flipping, and then there's punching. So for pitching and flipping, right, and I'm just kind of like picking little isolated pockets or cover, or maybe little clumps of grass. Some stronger grass clumps, or like more built out grass clumps. The 5/8 tungsten is kind of where I live. I really, really like this presentation. This has got actually a 3/0 flipping hook from Gamakatsu. Nice, small, compact. This is my beta choice, that Reaction Innovations Beaver. You just can't beat this. For me, this is like when I need a bite and my back's against the wall and I can find grass, I'm gonna do some of the damage on this. I'm gonna flip and punch until I can't anymore. When it does come time to punch through something a lot heavier, that's when I go to the 1 1/4 ounce. This thing, if it hits you in the head out there, it might be lights out, but this big heavy tungsten 1 1/4 ounce to the same 3/0 flipping hook, same bait, just a heavier tungsten to get you through some of that thicker cabbage and that topped out grass. Man, I absolutely love this technique. Something interesting I started trying is flipping and punching on a 5/8 kind of lighter setup. I was throwing on 30-pound braid. The reason for that is I've heard from a few of the pros when they're talking on their YouTube channels that 30-pound braid will cut through cabbage like a cheese wire. It just cuts through the thick stuff a lot easier. You can get the fish out faster. If you let it get hung up, that's where you're in trouble. But if you can rip this out of cabbage as best you can with that 30-pound, you'll land more fish. And that, to me, this year was true. I was able to get a good hook set, get it out of the cabbage faster, get it in the boat as quickly as I could. Didn't have to deal with that big clump of grass getting caught up on your 50-pound braid, which is what I have on the heavier stuff. This going into that big heavy stuff, you just need heavier line. You could use the 30. I have used the 30, but at sometimes it just broke. I mean, it's just cutting through all that stuff, or it just catches the right thing. The 30-pound was breaking on me, so went back to the 50. You're throwing this thing. This weight alone is like $10. So if we're talking about nuances with the heavy stuff, I'm just going 50-pound. But flipping and punching just normal cover sparse grass, I'm on a 30-pound braid, and it's been pretty good to me so far. Now, the last technique that I want to talk about is actually one of my finesse techniques, and it is absolutely hands down my favorite technique I've learned, period. Like, overall, has won me the most money this year, has come in clutch for me when I needed it, when I had that, when I needed that extra bite, that fifth fish, or even a kicker fish in the fall tournament that I won. I went to this technique, and I will preach this technique to anybody who wants to learn it. So this is the Neko rig, or the Nico rig. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it works. So the Neko rig, I have 3 different hooks that I use. One is the Gamakatsu G Finesse size 1/0 stinger hook. This hook has 2 titanium weed guards that keep it a little bit more weedless and help get around dock poles and those types of things. The Trokar weedless finesse Neko or Nico hook. 1/0 again is a really great hook. It's the same concept, but it has plastic weed guards. And then don't even know if I want to show you this, but this is the Gamakatsu finesse cover Neko hook. This cover Nico is absolutely insane. This cover Nico is probably the number 1 technique I have ever learned, just in terms of its versatility and my confidence in it. That if I get bit, I'm going to get a hook up, and then it's up to me to get it in the boat. But when I need a fish, and sometimes when fishing's really tough, I go to this Nico, and I'll show you real quick. I like using the Z-Man, the Laz-Tech baits, not just for their stretchiness and not just for the fact that they're super buoyant, but they last. One of these can last you multiple fishing trips, and especially when you're using a Nico hook, you can use some of the other really good baits, but I find that they'll rip. So the way you do this is you have to think about your bait. It's got this little tail back here, right? And the head is what's going to have the Nico weight. So this Nico weight is just a nail weight. Can be tungsten, can be lead, whatever you want it to be. And you just put that in the head of the bait, right? So that's in there now. And what this does is, it doesn't have to be very heavy. I think this is like a 1/32. I mean, light, right? Really, this is just giving your bait some orientation towards the bottom. It's gonna float kind of in a spiral. It's not quite like a Senko or a Wacky that kind of does that shimmy. This kind of floats in a spiral. But once it hits the ground, depending on your bait, if it's a super buoyant bait, it's gonna kind of sit something like that, and the head is gonna be in the ground. And as you kind of move the bait, it's gonna move around, kind of look like maybe something feeding on bottom, something stupid that's not paying attention. It's gonna kick up a little bit of dust, and I just think that looks like something feeding on the bottom, or a worm, and fish think that, if it's eating or if it's doing something down there in the mud that it's not paying attention, they'll come pick it up and absolutely destroy it. With that being said, remember that this head is in the bottom, right? So what you do with your hook is, instead of wacky, like sideways, you're going to come through. This is the head. Come back away from the head, back up the tail, and put the hook facing back upwards. See that? Now, the reason you do this is because if you're going to be shaking this around maybe some logs or cover, if you're shaking this around a dock pole, when it's coming past, it's going to stay weedless. If you have the hook the other way and you come past, that hook is going to bury itself into whatever you're trying to get it by. But if you reverse that hook back up towards you, right, towards the top of the water column, as it comes by things, it's going to be a lot more weedless. You're going to catch up a lot less. And when that fish comes to get it from behind, that hook point is now facing the roof of its mouth. You lift up and you've got it pinned. Half the time, maybe more than half the time, when I catch a fish, this thing is in the roof of the fish's mouth. The other half of the time, it's in a corner. And it's just, the hookup percentage on this is insane. I throw this a lot of times in the same way you'd throw a wacky, skip it under a dock. But the versatility to me comes when you're not on the bank and you're off deep and you're throwing it in like 8 to 10 right at the edge of a weed line. This can go kind of slowly towards the bottom of the weed line. If it ever makes the bottom, half the time they'll eat it on the fall. But if you do get it on the bottom of a weed line, you can walk this down a weed line, and any fish hanging out in the weed line, gonna eat it. Any fish hanging out here waiting for something to come out of the grass, gonna eat it. So I freaking love this presentation. I'm sure there's a lot of people who use it that don't talk about it. So yeah, add this to your arsenal, give it a go. You can Nico anything. You can put craws. You can use maybe some creature type style. I like using the stick bait a lot, but I also use, Daiwa makes these things called the Nico straights and the Nico fats. I would pick myself up some of those. But again, if it doesn't have that Elastec technology, right? This can get hooked several times and it's not going to rip out. A lot of the other baits do rip out, but the trade-off is the way they sink, the salt content, maybe some of the smells and other things that they can add that these Elastec baits really don't have. So keep that in mind when you're using that. So that's all I have to share. Those are some of the baits that were just kind of lying around. I'm just kind of testing out this video to see how I can edit this sound and use this camera. And maybe this winter we'll do some more, maybe some more like educational style, or just sharing some of my opinions, or maybe looking at some of these lakes that are coming up on the schedule. So stay tuned. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe we'll talk a little bit of BFS on the next one. Thank you so much, and we'll see you later. Peace.